this video is going to show you how to build a personal assistant inside of ChatGPT and how to give it superpowers by letting it connect to all of your other softwares. I'm going to give you all of the resources you're going to need to build along with me. So hope you get a lot out of this one, and let's get going.
No code, oh yeah. No code.
What are some potential use cases for this? Well, if you think about any piece of software that you use on a day-to-day basis in your job or in your business, now think of the different functions that you do inside of those softwares. And essentially what you're going to be able to do is you're going to be able to do all of those things now from just giving basic instruction to ChatGPT to do it on your behalf. Feels like you're just sending a message, or there's even the voice mode inside of ChatGPT. You'll be able to literally just say something like, hey, I've got an idea about a new post on no-code tool automation in 2024. So do a social media post on Twitter, LinkedIn, and Facebook. And so you can just find over time as you build this out and as you use it more and more, and as you tie more and more functionality into it, you're going to find that you're not going to need to leave the ChatGPT ecosystem very much. You're going to have a pre-built infrastructure. It is able to interact with all of your primary tools. You may have seen the most recent GPT-4o, the Omni model release, so in particular the live voice functionality, whereby it really looks like you'd almost have an assistant in your phone just on the desk beside you, and you'll be chatting back and forward with it. And so if you've got the ability for that type of an interface to now interact with your softwares, well, I can imagine it'll be really useful and really beneficial over time. So we're going to get started with the step-by-step tutorial in just a second. I'm going to go through what subscriptions you're likely to need to follow along with me. And I'm also going to show you exactly where you can get all of the resources to follow along with the build and to make this build as streamlined, as straightforward for you as possible. The subscriptions you're definitely going to need, well, number one is going to be a ChatGPT Plus subscription. It's $20 a month. It's crucial for this build in that it is a ChatGPT personal assistant. Make.com is essentially a no-code automation platform. It allows you create links between your different softwares in a visual drag and drop builder. So for example, you could get some data out of your Airtable database, send that to a Google Sheets document. The Google Sheets document could send it into Stripe so that it creates an invoice. That's one example, but you can think of whatever softwares you use, it can connect it together, and it's a really easy interface for getting complex scenarios and automations up and running really quickly. The free plan on that will be fine for building along with this particular tutorial. It will only give you 2 scenarios, so if you do like it and you do feel that you're going to use it more and more, there's a good plan that works out at about $9 a month, and it gives you quite a lot of processing power under that plan. The other thing I'm going to feature in this video is Airtable. I use Airtable all the time. It's my main CRM and database inside of my own business. Again, you don't have to use Airtable for this. If you're more comfortable using something like Google Sheets, that's absolutely fine. You can follow along and use something like Google Sheets instead. You can also just set up an Airtable free plan, and the free plan will be absolutely fine for everything that you'll see in this video. In terms of the resources, I'm going to show you where you can find that. There's a link in the description of the video below. It will direct you to my community. It's completely free to access, and you can go in there, and if you come down here and click on the resources section, you'll find all of the resource pack for this particular video, so you can download everything and come back and follow along step by step in this video. Okay, let's get going. We're going to go through every step, and we will hopefully at the end of this video all have a personal assistant built inside of ChatGPT that we can then start layering on more and more functionality over time. So step one is to come to chatgpt.com, and we're going to come in here into Explore GPTs, and then we're going to click this button up here called Create, and we're going to jump straight to the Configure screen, and this is where you're going to set up your personal assistant GPT in the first place. What we'll do is give it a title. I'll call my one personal assistant code. Description is really just more to give it something about what this GPT does so that people at a glance can see what it is. It doesn't really matter what you describe in here. It's not going to impact the actual overall functioning of the GPT. It's more for your own reference. Then in the instructions, if you go to the resources section and you find the file called personal assistant prompt, if you go and just simply copy and paste what I've got there and maybe just update it for your own name. This prompt is something that you'll probably develop and build out over time. This is the bare minimum that you'd really want to put in here in terms terms of instructions. You want to think of instructions as really being like writing a very detailed operating guideline for how you want your GPT to behave. And a good way to think about it is if you were trying to explain the task or the procedure or the behavior that you're hoping to get as if you're explaining it to a toddler, and you break things down into steps, that's usually going to get you better results from your GPT. In this case, it's good enough to basically let them know the role that they're playing and that they're a useful and helpful assistant for you, and then you can give them your name so that when they're talking back and forth to you, it feels a little bit more personal again. And really the primary thing that we're getting in here is letting the GPT know that they have a suite of actions that they can choose from. And what we mean by actions is these are going to be the different webhooks, triggered scenarios, or the different automations that we're going to build in make.com that it's going to be able to choose from depending on what way you're talking to it or what you're asking it to do. It'll know which scenario or automation to choose, and it'll trigger that automation. But before it does that, we want to make sure that it gathers the relevant information that it needs from you in order to be able to do that automation or complete that task effectively. Once you've the instructions filled in and completed there, and you've updated maybe for your name and things like that, you can come down here, and I generally just turn on all of the capabilities. You can turn them off if you want, but it just means that if you do want to use some of the other capabilities, like for example web browsing, if it needs to go and search for live data because the models are only going to be trained to a certain cutoff date, if you want to create images, and if you want the code interpreter function, which can be really useful, especially if you're going to be retrieving data back from, say, a Google Sheets document, and you want your GPT now to be able to actually analyze that data, give you insights from it, create charts and graphs and things like that. So it's useful to have that turned on. The actions section is the critical part. We're going to come back to that in a couple of steps time. And this is where we're going to update this part so that it knows how it is able to do certain actions on your behalf. And in this case, it's going to be actions through make.com. Okay, so once we've got that done, again, you can create an image for your personal GPT. If you just click here, you can use DALL-E and it will just do something automatically for you. So we might as well just get something up and running for the time being. It'll probably take a little bit of time. So it's done a lovely picture of what looks to be a very professional assistant. So that's great. So then we just hit create, and I'm going to take only me because I definitely only want me to be able to use this. It's going to have access to some of my other softwares, and I don't want this to be publicly available through the GPT store. So I'm going to click save and view GPT. Okay, so I now have my basic personal assistant set up. Now what I'm going to want to do is actually create my first scenario inside of make.com, being the first capability or action that I want my personal assistant to be able to do for me. So if you just jump over into make.com and log in, you should land on a screen like this. And if we go to create new scenario, it'll open the scenario builder. And really for all of these scenarios, any scenario you're building that you want your personal assistant to be able to trigger, it's always going to be this webhook module that kicks it off. And a webhook is essentially a web address or a URL that is unique to this particular scenario. And when ChatGPT calls that URL, it basically tells make.com to start this particular automation. So if we go custom webhook, and I'm going to add a new webhook. This is always the process for the start of a new thing. I find giving the name to the webhook is to be as descriptive as possible as to what it is. So I'm going to say personal assistant in terms of that's how I'm going to be using it. And I think for this example, I was trying to think of a use case on the fly to build. I think what we might do is just do something simple where it's going to be a webhook. It's going to put some data into Airtable for us, and then it's going to send a response back to the ChatGPT conversation. I think that maybe we'll try and do, say, expense receipt processing. So we'll upload an expense receipt into our ChatGPT personal assistant. It'll extract some of the data, and then it'll put that data into our Airtable expense database so that it's as if we're going through our expenses, or if we're out and about and we have our phone with us and we take a photo of a receipt, it'll put it into our database, or it could be linked to any other accounting software that you use. It could be QuickBooks or Xero or anything like that. But in this example, we'll just use Airtable. Again, you could use Google Sheets or something as simple as that. More, this is just to show you the process, and we can move on to more complex automations and scenarios once we've got the basic infrastructure set up. And we'll just click save. You'll see this part in blue here has created essentially a unique webhook for us to use. And so we're going to click this button here, copy address to clipboard, and that's basically going to copy that webhook for us. We're now going to go back to the resources section, because now what we need to do is configure that actions section inside of our personal assistant GPT. So if we jump back into the resources, there's a file there that's called the OpenAPI Schema. Now this is going to look complex, but the good news is you don't have to worry about this. This is more for information purposes, and you can use this as a template if you want. But luckily I have gone and actually created a GPT that will help us do this part. So essentially what this is this is what's called an OpenAPI schema. And this is what the GPT requires to be pasted into the actions section, and it gives OpenAI all of the information that it needs about all of the different webhooks and different automations that you have created for it to use. Okay, so if we come into this link here at the bottom of this resource, it'll bring you to a custom GPT that I've already created and I've made available to all of you guys through this link. It's not available in the GPT store, so it's only available to you guys in watching this video. And essentially what this GPT is, I've given it a prompt in the back end that's going to prompt you through the various questions that's going to help us in creating one of these OpenAPI schemas for us. And then all we're going to have to do is copy and paste that schema into our personal assistant GPT. So it just says here, sure, I can help you with that. Let's start by gathering necessary information. Webhook ID. This is the code at the end of the unique make.com webhook. That's why I copied that webhook address. So I'm going to put that in. And the webhook ID is this last bit of code here at the end of the webhook. So I'm going to get rid of that first part, and I'm just going to tell it webhook ID is that. And what else is it asking us for? Action. What scenarios the make.com webhook triggering? For example, create an invoice in Xero, record in Airtable, get the appointments from a Google Calendar for a week. So I'm just going to say that the action is need an expense receipt. Okay, and then data properties, what information needs to be sent with the webhook. So this is the part where it just needs a little bit of thought each time. So you're trying to think, when we come back into Make, we're going to have an Airtable module as the next step, because what we're going to do is we're going to pass information from ChatGPT to this webhook, being the information from the receipt that we've scanned in. And then we're going to be creating an Airtable module, and we're going to know what data we want to save into Airtable, or what types of data. So if you think of a receipt or an expense receipt, you're going to get a pretty good idea of what types of data you're going to need to pass along in order to make that useful for you. So if you think about a receipt, you're definitely going to need the supplier name. You're definitely going to need the receipt description. You're definitely going to need to know the total amount, tax amount, and you might want the date. And then we're going to send that back. Let's confirm the data properties and their types. Here's what I have based on your description. Supplier name, the name of the supplier, perfect. Receipt description, a description of the total amount, tax amount, and then receipt date, the date of the receipt. Please confirm if all these properties are correct and if any of them are required or optional. It's asking us what fields are required every time, as in what data does it need to get from you at a minimum in order to trigger, or in order to now start the sending of data into make.com. In this scenario, we're definitely going to want probably the first three at a minimum. So we'll just say the first three are required, the other are optional. Perfect. Okay, so it's finished processing. It's created the all-important schema that we need. Once this part is done, you don't need to really know too much about it, other than that we need to click this button here, copy code. And now we're going to go back to our personal assistant. And if you come into the edit GPT functionality here, we're going to update the create new action part here. So this is where you paste the OpenAPI schema. We paste that in there, and we just let this all load up, and we hit update. Okay, so now our personal assistant should be hooked up and ready to go, in terms of ready to trigger a webhook to this particular automation or scenario flow that we're building. So what we can do here is we can try and get our assistant to just trigger a dummy call to the webhook, just to make sure that it's working. So when you come into Make here, you'll see that it's been loading this whole time. and it's waiting to actually receive a call or to be called and see what sort of data it gets. So if we go back into our personal assistant in here and ask it to send details from a receipt. So we've attached in a random coffee house receipt that I found online as some dummy information to try it out, and I've given it this prompt: hi, can you please send the details of this receipt to Airtable please? And let's just see what it does. Okay, so it's extracted what looks to be good data from the receipt. It has the correct tax amount, it's got the total amount, it's got the date, it's got the name. It's now asking, are they okay to send that data into make.com, and I'm going to hit confirm. So it's telling us that it's been successfully sent into Airtable. We know that actually can't be the case because we haven't actually built the Airtable part yet. But if we come back into make.com, you'll see now it's got this successfully determined and it's got the number 1 here. So if we click OK, and now what we should do is just right click on this and click run this module only. The reason we're doing this is we're going to try and call it again so that it can actually catch the data and we can see what data it has actually caught this time. Can you please send that data again to Airtable? Again, we're just going to confirm it this time. It doesn't need to scan the receipt this time. It already has the information. The receipt details have been successfully sent to Airtable again. So now if we come back into make, you'll see now we've got a white number 1, and if you click on that, you should see what it has received from ChatGPT. And what it has received is the supplier name being Coffee House, the receipt description being purchase of Americano and steamed milk, total amount $4.78, total amount 0, and the receipt date. So that looks absolutely perfect. So now we know that we can go and build out our Airtable part to this automation / scenario. And how we do that is we come down to this little plus down here, we find Airtable, and then what we're going to want to do here is create a record in Airtable. So we add that module in there. You'll see it's linked to the first module. When you first click into this, it's going to get you to authenticate your Airtable account. So if you don't already have Airtable, you can go and create an account. Alternatively, you could use a Google Sheets module for this part and just follow along, but inside of Google Sheets instead. Once we have this, we will configure it. I'm going to try and find this particular base here that I've already set up, which is a ChatGPT personal assistant base. I've got various tabs here. For this particular action, this expenses tab is the one that we're going to use. Again, a copy of this Airtable base will be available in the resources section, which is linked in the description below. So if you want to build along with each of these examples, you have this as a starting point just to kind of quicken things along. It's the basic table. It's got the supplier name, the invoice date, the expense description, the expense amount, the tax amount, and it's basically all of the data that we had prescribed to our OpenAPI schema or to our personal assistant that we would like for it to store inside of Airtable. We're going to come back into make and we're going to find that base. Okay, we found that base, so it's now loading up all the various tables from that base, and we know that for this particular automation we're going to want to use the expenses table that we just looked at, and it now populates all the fields that we just looked at. So we're going to now match the data that ChatGPT is sending and that it's already configured to make sure that it sends each time in this particular format, and we're going to map it to the relevant fields in Airtable. So we'll go supplier name, we'll go invoice date, we'll go expense description, we'll go expense amount, we'll go tax amount, and I think that's all of the bits that we have for this particular automation, and we'll just click OK. And then what we will do is, just to make sure that everything is working, we'll hit run once and we'll come back into our personal assistant and we'll just ask, can it send that information again to Airtable, and see does it work. Again, asking us to confirm. If we come into make.com, we can see the thing operating here. It's caught the webhook. It's got the same data as the last time. It's now passed it to Airtable. Airtable's gone green, which means that it's created something. And if we come back into the Airtable base, you can see that it's automatically created this row for us here. And so we now have a proof of concept that appears to be working. So what would probably be quite useful to send back to ChatGPT, because we don't necessarily always want to have Airtable open to prove or to make ourselves happy that it's been created. And what you can do is you can come in and expand your record by clicking these blue arrows over here, and you can click this little link icon and copy that. It's now copied the URL, and if we come into make.com, we can now finish the automation, this quite basic simple automation. And the way I would usually recommend you end one of these types of automations where it's being triggered by a webhook is to use what's called a webhook response at the end. And what this means is where ChatGPT is sending it data in the first place to be utilized inside of whatever your automation and flow here is in the middle, you could now choose to send stuff back to Chat through this module so that it receives information when it's finished. So you could write something like, the expense has now been recorded in Airtable. See the record here. And that's where I'm going to paste the link from the record. Okay. And you'll see the record link comes in a very set formula. And at the end of it, it has this thing called blocks equals hide. We'll just delete that little part out. And then this little code here is the actual record ID. Okay, and that's going to change every time a new record is created. Every row inside of Airtable has a unique record ID. And the good thing here is we can delete that out and we can actually take the record ID dynamically from the record that has just been created from this last step, and we'll put that at the end there, and that link should now work every single time we create a different expense receipt. So if we click OK, and we're going to click save, and I'm about 85% confident this should just work every single time now. The last thing I'd say you should do here is just give a good name to each scenario that you create, because it can get confusing quite quickly when you have about 5 or 10 or 15 of these that your personal assistant is hooked up to, and you want to have a pretty good description so you can remember what each one is doing. So I'll just say webhook trigger recording of expense to Airtable from ChatGPT. Okay, we'll click save there, and the last thing we can do here is actually turn it on. So I think the best way to do a proof of concept here is to actually, let's try and do the whole thing from scratch. So to attach a receipt, you just click the little attach icon here and click upload from computer. So I've got a completely different receipt in here. This time a place called Harvard Bookstore. And I'm just going to ask it the same prompt as what I had earlier, which is this. Hi, can you please send the details of this receipt to Airtable? Please, I'm obviously being extra polite here, and let's see what it does. So looks good. Again, it's read the receipt. We'll just double check the details. So that all looks perfect. So I'm going to hit confirm. Well, before I do, I'm going to come back into Make here, and I'm just going to click this run once button. You don't have to do this every time. It's just good to do for testing purposes. The thing is already on, so this would have worked even without doing this, but I just do this so that I'll show you when we come back to it. So if we come back here and just hit confirm, and let's just see, we'll wait in this screen to see, do we get our link to our newly created record inside of Airtable? So it hasn't got that back. It didn't take in the response properly. But if we come back here, everything's run through the flow correctly, and so let me just see what happens in Airtable. It's created the expense in Airtable, so something has just gone a little bit awry there where it has not sent the actual response back. So maybe what we need to do is actually tell ChatGPT, tell the user the following, and let's just see, does that work now? Run once, and if we come back into the personal assistant and just send, let's see what it does. Okay, so that's a good twist to have there. So it's important in your webhook response to actually give it a little bit of instruction as to what to do with the rest of the info inside of your response, so that when the ChatGPT assistant gets back the response in here, it knows that it's being instructed to basically make sure that it gives this information. So let's just see, does the link actually work? And so if we click that link, it's opened up that record perfectly for us inside of Airtable. And you can see here it's recorded that exact same receipt again inside of Airtable. So that pretty much has demonstrated how you can get the building blocks of this ready to go. We've got a personal assistant here that's able to trigger a webhook inside of Make. We now have the ability to add more webhooks into it, and I'll show you how to do that now in just a second. But this thing is fully functional, and we know that the basic schema is working. Okay, so that brings us to the end of the basic tutorial, which shows you how to create a personal GPT, how to create the schema for that GPT so that it can trigger a webhook, how to create a basic scenario or automation inside of Make, and then how to troubleshoot that and how to make sure that it's all working. If you've gotten this far, you're now ready to take it to the next level. which is whereby you can now start layering in more and more and more of these webhooks following the exact same process of what we've done here, but this time you're just trying to build them all within this one personal assistant that you've created, so that over time it could have 15, 20, 30 webhook scenarios to choose from, and you'll know them all because you've built them up, and now it's a very powerful personal assistant that you'll be able to just talk to. If I go to my own assistant over here, I can show you a couple of other examples. So for example, can you create an invoice for me? So this is a little bit different because it's creating a sales invoice as opposed to recording an expense receipt, and so it's asking me for all the data that I want to give it. So I'm just going to copy that and paste in, and I'm going to put in customer name will be Hulk Hogan. Invoice date, I'm just going to say today and see how it handles that. Due date, I'm just going to say today as well. I'm going to leave all these optional ones as blank. Invoice description, I'm just going to say tutorial fee equals make sure you like and subscribe to the channel, please, if you got value out of this video. Invoice amount, we're going to go with €500, and total tax VAT, we're just going to put in 23, and we're going to hit send, hit confirm. What I've obviously pre-programmed the webhook response to do is send me a PDF copy of the invoice that it's created. So if we click on that, you'll see that it's created an invoice for Hulk Hogan. And if we come back into the personal assistant, there's various other things they can do. Like I find just being able to even create a to-do list item inside of my Airtable database is really useful. So I could do something like please add a to-do list item, create new tutorial based on comment requests. YouTube priority is high. And let's see what this does. So again, this is now triggering a different webhook automation. If we confirm there, let's see what this one does. And so it's come back, the task has been successfully created and added to your to-do list. So this one was similar to what the example we just looked, where it's bringing me straight to the to-do list. So it's got the create new tutorial based on YouTube, it's put it in as to do, it's got it as high priority, and that it was created today. So the way to add more webhooks into your personal assistant is by going back to that create a webhook schema, OpenAPI schema, and just simply following the steps here again. And when you get to the end of it, if we actually open this earlier chat that we had from earlier, when you get to the end of this chat, when you give it all the other instructions, it says, additionally, do you have an existing OpenAPI schema in your personal assistant GPT, or would you like help preparing a new OpenAPI schema? So it's at this point that you would go into your personal assistant, you would go into Edit GPT, you'll come in here and you'll find in the actions, you'll find your existing master schema, because it's always going to be just one schema in here, even though it might have several different webhooks. And you're going to copy that each time you're adding a new one to it, and you're going to come back to your chat with the OpenAPI Schema GPT creator that I've made, and you're basically going to add in your schema. You're going to say merge with this master schema, please. And you're going to paste your master schema in there, and what it's going to do is whatever your new schema here is based on giving it new information up here. So say for example you have an action where you want it to create a Twitter post for you based on giving it a simple prompt. So you might say, hi, I'd like you to do a Twitter post based on this new AI tool called Perplexity that I've been using. And it will, this is the instructions you'll give it, and follow through the steps, and it will now give you an open API for doing that. You'll go into make.com, build the flow out, and then you'll come down at the end and you'll basically go get your open API from the personal assistant and paste that there, and basically ask this GPT to merge the new API schema for Twitter into your master list that has all of your other existing APIs or existing webhooks. And so that's pretty much it. Once it merges it, then you'll be copying that code and coming back into your personal assistant, and you'll be basically pasting over the action inside of here, so that it now has, you know, in this scenario, it might now have two webhook capabilities, one being where it records an expense receipt, and the next one being it creates a Twitter post, and so on and so forth. And they can get more complicated than that. So that concludes the tutorial part of the video. Thanks a million for getting this far in the video. If you did enjoy it and if you get any value of it, I really would appreciate if you'd subscribe to the channel and click the like button. It helps me grow the channel. I'm hoping to produce more and more tutorials like this, particularly in the AI and no-code space. So if you'd like to see more of this into the future, definitely make sure you subscribe, check out the community, and I look forward to chatting with you there as well. Thanks.